I used to believe that if I loved my son deeply enough, he would eventually love me back. That the sacrifices, the sleepless nights, the endless second chances would all one day mean something to him. Gavin wasn't an easy child. Moody, impulsive, always chasing shortcuts. But I held on to the hope that my consistency would be the anchor he needed. I paid off his gambling debts, covered his tuition when he dropped out of school, and even emptied my savings to get him a fresh start after yet another failed business. And every time he came to me with that familiar mix of desperation and charm, I told myself this was what mothers did. They gave until they had nothing left. So when he called me that evening, saying Delilah was pregnant and the two of them were struggling, I didn't hesitate. I transferred $330,000 from my retirement fund to his account without a second thought. "Make sure Delilah gets proper supplements," I said gently, my voice barely above a whisper. "Take care of her, and the baby." Gavin laughed lightly, the same rehearsed chuckle he always used to cover disinterest. "Of course, Mom. I'm gonna be a dad. You better believe I'll take care of them." My throat clenched. I wanted to believe him, to pretend, for just one more moment, that I mattered to him beyond what I could provide. "I love you, sweetheart," I murmured. "Okay, gotta run." He cut in, abrupt and rushed. "Got stuff going on. Bye." Not even a thank you. I held the phone to my ear long after he hung up, the dial tone ringing in my ears like an alarm I couldn't shut off. And then, through the open line, came a voice I hadn't expected, clear as glass, biting as frost. Finally, the old woman sent the money. It was Delilah. Her tone was bright, casual, almost gleeful. My body went still. My breath hitched mid-inhale. Maybe, I thought, Gavin would say something, correct her, defend me, even offer a half-hearted rebuke. But instead, he scoffed. "She's too damn careful. We had to fake a pregnancy just to get her to crack." My hands trembled. I didn't even realize how hard I was gripping the phone until I heard the soft plastic casing creak beneath my fingers. The blood drained from my face, and something inside me, the last fragile thread of trust, snapped. My mind flashed through every warm memory we'd shared. Gavin playing with Benny in the yard when he was younger, his arms around me on his high school graduation day. The time he cried and told me I was his only real family. All of it lies. Carefully curated performances to keep me compliant. I felt my knees weaken. I sat down in the middle of the kitchen floor, the phone still clutched in my hand, a hollow pit opening in my chest where my heart used to be. I don't know how long I stayed there, but when the silence finally returned, it felt louder than any scream. I was alone, not just physically. I had been alone for years, but in a way that made the world feel colder, heavier. I wasn't a mother. I was an ATM, a target, a fool. The grief came in waves, followed quickly by anger that burned at the edges of my vision, sharp and breathless. But beneath it all was fear, raw, primal fear. If Gavin and Delilah had lied about the baby, what else were they capable of? Would they bleed me dry and vanish? Or worse, was I just one accident away from becoming a tragic headline? "Elderly woman slips during hiking trip." I pressed the heel of my palm against my chest, trying to quiet the pounding of my heart. I had given everything to a boy who grew into a man that didn't just fail to love me, he actively despised me. I didn't cry that night. I didn't scream. I just sat in the dark, holding a silence so heavy it nearly crushed me. That was the moment I stopped being Elena the mother and began becoming Elena, the survivor. The knock on my front door came just 2 days after I heard Delilah's voice slice through my heart like a scalpel. I hadn't eaten. Sleep had come in fits, broken by nightmares where I was falling, and no one reached out to catch me. My mind had replayed their call so often, I could recite their betrayal like scripture. I didn't expect company. I didn't expect them. When I opened the door, there they were, Gavin and Delilah, standing on my porch as if nothing had happened, as if my world hadn't crumbled just days earlier. Gavin gave me that easy grin I used to mistake for warmth. Delilah stood beside him, her hand resting on her stomach like a mocking pantomime of motherhood, her smile the perfect blend of sugar and poison. "Thought we'd check on you," Gavin said, breezing past me with a bag in hand, shoving it into my arms without a second thought. "Brought you some supplements. Gotta stay healthy, right?" I stared at them, the weight of the bag nearly slipping from my hands. The audacity, the act. It was obscene. "Thank you," I murmured, my voice hollow, brittle. Delilah clasped my hand as she entered, her grip cold and calculated. "Helen, Gavin talks about you all the time. He's just been so swamped with work. We've missed you." I watched them move through my house like they owned it, laughing and chatting, brushing off the dust of silence I'd clung to for the past 48 hours. A numb part of me marveled at their performance. They were good. Too good. But I wasn't who I was 3 days ago. The part of me that ached to believe them had withered, scorched by betrayal. Still, I smiled, nodded, played along, because if they were putting on a show, I could play a role too. "Come in," I said gently, touching Gavin's arm, pretending I didn't recoil inside. As we sat in the living room, Gavin casually tossed out the real reason for their visit. "So, with the baby coming and our place being so cramped, we were thinking maybe we could move in for a while." He said it like he was asking to borrow a cup of sugar. My heart thudded painfully in my chest, a warning bell louder than his words. "Of course," I replied calmly. The lie slipped from my lips like silk. Delilah's face lit up, her eyes gleaming with premature victory. But I saw through them. Every glance, every saccharine word, none of it was real. They had practiced this, rehearsed it. They thought they were winning. As if that wasn't enough, Gavin leaned forward, voice smooth but expectant. "Actually, since we'll be living here, maybe we should just put the house in my name. To take care of taxes and maintenance. Make it easier for you." I stared at him. This house, this home I built with the broken pieces of my life, meant nothing to him beyond its value. I remembered the nights I held him through tantrums, fed him when he was too sick to lift a spoon, comforted him when his friends abandoned him. And now, he wanted my last sanctuary signed over like a used car. "That way," Delilah added sweetly, "you can rest. You've done enough, Helen. We'll take care of everything from now on." Her words were kind, but her tone was laced with control. She wasn't asking. She was claiming. I nodded, too stunned to speak. Not because I believed them, but because I finally understood the depth of their entitlement. The realization didn't come with fire. It came with frost. Cold, still, paralyzing. I looked around the room and realized how alone I truly was. My Benny was gone, dumped like trash by the son I once would have walked into fire for. My friends, long distant, my siblings, estranged. Gavin was all I had, and he saw me as a stepping stone, a wallet with a fading pulse. I felt something fracture inside me, something ancient and maternal and foolish. Yet, even in that moment of despair, I managed a smile. "That sounds reasonable," I said softly, already crafting the first threads of my counterplay. If they wanted to lie, deceive, and take, I'd let them. For now, because nothing cuts deeper than trust weaponized as bait, and nothing is more dangerous than a woman with nothing left to lose. From the moment Gavin and Delilah moved into my house, the air inside shifted, subtly at first, then with an oppressive weight I couldn't ignore. Their voices filled every hallway, their footsteps claimed every floorboard. What had once been my quiet refuge now echoed with their staged affection, like a theater set dressed up to hide the rot beneath. Delilah woke early each morning to make me breakfast, humming softly like some radiant homemaker from a 1950s magazine spread, while Gavin offered to wipe counters and tidy rooms he never noticed before. To any outsider, we might have looked like a loving family, 3 adults, building bridges, awaiting the arrival of a baby. But I knew better. Every sweet gesture was barbed, every smile rehearsed. They weren't here to reconnect. They were circling their prey, and I had invited the wolves into my den. Then came the morning Benny disappeared. He wasn't just a pet. Benny had been with me for 12 years, through illness, through heartbreak, through every lonely holiday Gavin had chosen not to visit. He was the only living creature who never made me question whether I was loved. That day, I woke up, and his spot beside the bed was cold. I searched the house in a slow-growing panic, under the tables, behind the couch, in every corner of the yard. No soft bark, no eager tail thumping against the wall. Just a silence so thick it choked me. "Gavin?" I asked, trying to keep the tremble out of my voice. "Have you seen Benny?" He didn't even look up from his plate. "Oh, the dog? Yeah, I took him out this morning. Dumped him a few neighborhoods away. He was always underfoot. Thought the house would be quieter without him." His words hit harder than any slap. "You dumped him?" I whispered, my hands shaking, my stomach twisting into a knot of disbelief and nausea. He shrugged like I'd asked about the weather. "It's just a dog, Mom. You're 60. What do you need a mutt for anyway? I did you a favor." The world tilted. I felt something inside me tear open. I couldn't even cry. There was no space for tears, only the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and stays. I turned toward Delilah, hoping for some semblance of remorse. She dabbed her lips with a napkin and offered, "Honestly, Helen, you should be thanking Gavin. That thing shed everywhere, and it's not healthy for the baby." The baby. The fictional child they invented to extract money from me. I stood there, hollow, every part of me screaming and yet paralyzed. I didn't eat that day. I couldn't. The scent of food turned my stomach. I sat alone in my room, staring at Benny's empty bed, the toy he used to carry in his mouth still resting by the door. I picked it up, cradled it like an urn, and finally let myself sob. Deep, ugly sobs that scraped at my ribs, that made my hands shake so violently I had to grip the edge of the dresser to steady myself. He was gone. My Benny. And I hadn't even been able to say goodbye. But beneath the grief, another feeling crept in. Fear. Real, visceral fear. If they could get rid of a living creature I loved without blinking, what else were they capable of? What was I to them now that the dog had been disposed of like garbage? What would happen if I made one wrong move, asked one wrong question, refused to sign one single paper? At night, I started locking my bedroom door. I slept with the light on, my phone clutched to my chest, listening for footsteps. Every creak of the wood, every whisper of movement down the hallway sent my heart racing. This was my house, and yet I felt like a prisoner, an intruder in the home I'd built with my own hands. I cooked for them. I cleaned after them. I listened to Delilah bark orders at me like a hired maid, pretending it didn't matter when she rolled her eyes or snapped her fingers. "Bring me water," she said one afternoon, and when I did, she spat it out dramatically, splashing it across my blouse. "Are you trying to burn me alive?" Her voice trembled with theatrical offense. Gavin didn't even look up from his phone. I wanted to scream, to throw plates, to shake them until the masks cracked and the monsters underneath showed their faces in the daylight. But I didn't. I smiled. I nodded. I apologized. Because I needed time. Because while they thought they were breaking me down, I was already rebuilding. Quietly. Strategically. With a grief that had hardened into something colder than rage. Purpose. It was an accident, really. If Gavin hadn't been so careless, if he had simply closed his laptop like he normally did, maybe I wouldn't have found it. Maybe I would have continued living under the same roof with the two people who were planning my death. I was cleaning the living room. Because, of course, I still did that, like the housekeeper I'd become, when I noticed the faint glow of the screen. He must have stepped away in the middle of something. At first, I was just going to close it. But then, I saw the headline in the open browser window. How to take out a high-value life insurance policy on a senior without their knowledge. My blood ran cold. I stared, unblinking, as I scrolled down. Common methods of accidental disappearance. Best states for unmonitored death benefits. How to change a trust beneficiary after death. The world tilted beneath me. I wasn't reading fiction. These were real queries, real plans. Someone had written this. Someone sitting in my home, eating my food, sleeping under my roof. My vision blurred as I clicked deeper, my hands trembling so violently I had to steady them against the desk. There were even draft emails addressed to Delilah, filled with details about my insurance plan, my assets, my vulnerabilities, the sheer precision, the cruelty of it. It was like finding your own obituary, written by your child. My knees gave out beneath me, and I sank to the floor, gasping for breath. There wasn't enough air in the room. There wasn't enough world left where I was safe. I felt like I was drowning in my own body, consumed by the knowledge that Gavin, my Gavin, wasn't just using me. He was planning to erase me, not metaphorically, literally. I was a number on a form, a risk on a spreadsheet, a payout waiting to be claimed. Tears didn't come, only cold sweat and the sharp taste of acid rising in my throat. I thought I had reached the deepest level of heartbreak when they took Benny. I was wrong. This was something darker, colder, a depth I hadn't known existed, a truth so violent it unstitched everything I thought I knew about my life. I had raised him. I had loved him. And now, he was plotting to kill me. I drove myself to the insurance office, my fingers clenching the wheel so tightly they ached. I didn't even remember the drive. I just remember walking up to the front desk, my voice hoarse, barely controlled. "I need to know," I said, forcing each word out, "if anyone has taken out a life insurance policy under my name." The woman behind the counter gave a professional smile and began typing. The silence between her clicks stretched into eternity. Then she looked up. "Yes, Ms. Cross," she said calmly. "There is. Premium tier. Registered by Gavin Pierce. It's one of our most expensive plans." I stood there frozen, my soul hollowed out like someone had reached inside and scooped it clean. I took the file she handed me, fingers numb, my heart thudding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. There it was, printed in black ink. Beneficiary, Delilah Hart. I walked out of that office not as a mother, not even as a person, but as a target. I sat in my car for a long time, unable to start the engine, unable to cry, unable to do anything but stare blankly at the dashboard while the weight of everything crushed me in slow, suffocating waves. My hands shook so badly I dropped the papers. I bent to pick them up and caught sight of my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. She looked older, emptier, like a ghost who hadn't realized she was already dead. That's what I had become, dead to the only child I had ever loved, invisible in the house I built, disposable in the eyes of the people I fed, clothed, and sheltered. I had spent decades being a mother. Now I was something else. Something Gavin and Delilah were ready to bury, quietly, conveniently, profitably. I had no plan yet, only fear, raw and pulsing. But I also knew this. If they wanted me gone, they'd have to try harder, much harder. Because the Elena Cross they thought they could silence? She just opened her eyes. I should have been terrified when they invited me on the hiking trip, but what I felt was worse, a cold, paralyzing certainty. Gavin knocked on my bedroom door one evening, flashing that counterfeit warmth he wore like a borrowed suit. "Mom," he said cheerfully, "Delilah and I thought it might be nice to take you out of the house this weekend. A change of scenery, some fresh air. National Forest's beautiful this time of year." Delilah followed a beat later, all soft eyes and feigned remorse. "I've been so snappy lately, Helen. I want to make it up to you. Let's start over. Just the three of us." Her hand rested gently on my back. It might have seemed like affection to anyone else, but I felt it, a calculated push, like positioning a chess piece. I agreed without hesitation, smiled even. "That sounds lovely," I said, hearing my voice from somewhere far away. They didn't expect me to say yes so quickly. For a moment, Gavin's mask slipped, a flicker of surprise in his eyes before it snapped back into place. Delilah took the reins. "You better go pack, Helen. We'll be leaving early." I shut my bedroom door and locked it with shaking hands. On the outside, I was calm. But inside, I was being unraveled. I sat on the edge of my bed for hours, staring at the empty backpack, trying to will my thoughts into order. They were going to kill me. That truth pulsed through my skull like a siren. It wasn't speculation anymore. I had read it in Gavin's own digital trail, seen it laid out in files, in search queries, in insurance policies that turned my life into a payout. And now they were taking me to a secluded forest, known for its cliffs, for its unmarked trails, for the people who wandered in and were never seen again. My hands began to tremble. I could already hear the headlines. "Elderly woman slips during hike. Tragic accident." My heart pounded so violently I had to press my palm against my chest. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of dying knowing my son had planned it, that the last face I'd see would be his, cold and calculating as he pushed me into the void. The morning of the trip was quiet, too quiet. I dressed in layers, tucked my phone into a side pocket, slipped a tiny tin of crushed sedatives I had reclaimed from their hidden stash into my coat. They didn't know I had found them days ago, stashed carelessly behind the baking tins. They didn't know I had been watching them, weighing every action, preparing. Gavin drove, the silence in the car punctuated only by Delilah's occasional hums and Gavin's forced comments about the scenery. I nodded, smiled. I even laughed once, just to hear how hollow it sounded. The farther we drove, the more barren the surroundings became. Trees crowding the narrow road, cell signal long dead. My grip on the armrest tightened. I whispered one silent goodbye to Benny, to the only creature who had ever loved me without condition. We parked near the base of a trail Gavin claimed he'd researched. He handed me an electrolyte drink, his voice calm, rehearsed. "You'll need this to keep your energy up, Mom." I accepted it, raised it to my lips, tilted it just enough to make it convincing, but didn't swallow. His eyes flickered toward Delilah, and I saw it then, the shared glance, the almost imperceptible smirk. They thought they had me. "You two should eat something too," I said, offering the energy bars I had prepared. They took them without hesitation. After all, I was just the helpless old woman, easy to trick, easy to end. We reached a scenic overlook, high, exposed, perfect. Gavin gestured. "Take a seat, Mom. Rest a while." I sat. Delilah offered a fake compliment about the view, and then it happened. They began to move. Closer, slower. I let my body go limp. Collapsed right where I sat. It didn't take long. Delilah's delighted whisper cut through the trees. "She actually drank it." Gavin's reply, low and heartless. "Sorry, Mom, but the money's already spent." They never saw it coming. I stood slowly, brushed dirt from my coat, and looked down at their unconscious bodies, sprawled where they had planned to leave mine. I felt no triumph, only emptiness, a silence so vast it swallowed even the wind. I had lived my whole life to protect him. Now I had to survive him. I didn't look back as I descended the trail, leaving Gavin and Delilah unconscious and sprawled behind me like discarded puppets. The sun had begun to dip, staining the sky with blood-orange streaks as shadows stretched long across the forest floor. Each step I took felt like walking away from a funeral, except this time the casket had no lid, and the dead were still breathing. The wind had picked up. It howled through the branches like it too knew what had almost happened. I kept my pace steady, though inside I was unraveling. My heart beat against my ribs like a bird trapped in a cage. The air tasted sharp, metallic. I should have felt relief, even a sliver of safety. But I didn't, because nothing about what I'd just done made me feel alive. I hadn't gone more than a quarter mile when I heard it. A faint, broken sound. A voice. A man's voice, calling weakly for help. My body stiffened. I wasn't ready to face anyone. I was still carrying the rot of everything I had endured, of what I'd almost become. But something pulled me toward the sound. I pushed through dense underbrush until I saw him. A man sprawled on the forest floor, his leg twisted unnaturally beneath him, his face pale and slick with sweat. Blood had soaked through the knee of his hiking pants. His eyes, dazed and glassy, locked onto mine. "Please," he rasped. "Can you call someone?" I dropped to my knees beside him instinctively, already reaching for my phone. My hands were shaking. "It's going to be okay," I said, though my voice sounded distant to my own ears. I didn't know who I was comforting, him or myself. I called 911. As I waited, I stayed with him, pressing my coat under his head and wiping his brow with the inside of my sleeve. He never stopped thanking me. His voice was hoarse but earnest. "I didn't think anyone would find me," he said. "I thought I was going to die out here." That made two of us. I didn't tell him how close I had come to being left in the same woods, just with a different kind of silence surrounding me. I didn't tell him that I had only found him because I was running away from the unthinkable. When the medics arrived, I stepped back, watching them work quickly and efficiently, wrapping his leg, loading him onto a stretcher. As they wheeled him away, he reached out and grasped my hand. "You saved my life," he whispered. "I'm Walter. Walter Ellison." The name meant nothing to me in that moment, not until later. When I sat in the hospital waiting room alone, still shivering from cold and adrenaline, and overheard the nurses talking. That's the Walter Ellison, Chief Executive Officer of the Ellison Group. Imagine if we hadn't gotten there in time. Something flickered in my chest. Disbelief first, then dread. Not because he was important, but because my son had spent years trying to get a meeting with this man. Gavin had sent pitch decks, proposals, emails. He had once begged me to help him prepare a dinner to impress a potential investor he never named. That night, I made rack of lamb and served it on our best china. He left after 2 bites. Now here I was, in the most unlikely of places, having saved the very man Gavin had spent years chasing. My stomach churned with the cruel irony of it. Walter's assistant came out to thank me again. "He'll be fine," she said, smiling warmly. "Out of danger, and he's been asking for you." I stood outside his room for a moment, staring at the door handle, paralyzed. I didn't want gratitude. I didn't want recognition. I wanted to disappear. I was a woman who had just poisoned her own son, who had walked away from a cliff and never felt more dead inside. What kind of person was I now? When I finally stepped inside, Walter looked up, a smile already forming. "There she is," he said. "My guardian angel." I smiled back, but it felt like a borrowed gesture. I sat by his side, my hands clasped tightly in my lap, trying to stop them from trembling. "You're safe now," I whispered, and maybe, just maybe, so was I. But even as we talked, something inside me remained quiet and untouched. A part of me I feared would never return. I had survived. But the cost? The cost was everything I used to be. When Gavin and Delilah returned from the vacation I gifted them, 7 days of sun-drenched opulence in Thailand, they walked through the front door with glowing skin, branded luggage, and the entitled swagger of people who believed they had won. They didn't suspect a thing. Not the locked drawers, not the emptied closets, not the missing traces of their presence I had carefully erased while they sipped cocktails by the sea. The house they had tried to claim, my house, was already beginning to shed them like dead skin. I waited until they settled in, until Delilah began barking her usual demands, and Gavin flopped onto the couch like a sultan. And only then did I drop the final blow into his lap. An envelope. A thick, stapled stack of paperwork. "What's this?" he asked, thumbing through the pages with lazy disinterest, still chewing on a protein bar. His expression shifted as his eyes moved faster. I didn't speak. I just watched the color drain from his face. Delilah leaned over his shoulder, her mouth twisting as she scanned the columns. "What the hell is this?" she snapped. "All these bills? This says Gavin's the borrower?" I gave a quiet nod. "Everything you spent in Thailand, every dinner, every hotel suite, every boutique purchase, it's all been charged to Gavin's personal line of credit. You see, the money you were so freely spending wasn't mine. I just advanced it from his accounts. He'll have to repay it now. With interest." Gavin dropped the papers like they burned him, and I watched them scatter across the floor like ashes. "You're joking," he spat. "You're my mother. Isn't it normal for me to spend your money?" That line, that unthinking, grotesque entitlement, ripped through whatever numbness I had left. I leaned in, eyes sharp. "You remember I'm your mother when it's convenient. But tell me, Gavin, when was the last time you looked at me and said you loved me without needing something in return?" The doorbell rang 5 minutes later. Gavin, still reeling, opened it in a daze, only to find 2 uniformed movers standing on the porch. "We're here to pick up the remaining items for donation," one of them said cheerfully. "Final load." Gavin spun toward me, wild-eyed. What the hell is going on? Delilah shouted. Our things, our clothes, our jewelry, where are they? I stood slowly, my hands calm, my voice even. Gone. Given away. Everything you left here has been donated. The furniture, the bags, the electronics. You were never meant to stay. You were squatters in a home you tried to steal. Delilah pushed forward, face twisted with rage. You gave us this house. We signed the transfer papers. It's ours. I reached for another folder, thicker than the first. No, I said, placing it in Gavin's hands. You signed a non-binding letter of intent, not a deed, not a legal transfer. If you'd bothered to read the fine print, you'd have seen the line at the bottom. For display purposes only. Gavin stared at the document, his mouth opening and closing like a drowning man trying to breathe. Delilah was already shrieking. You lied! You tricked us! No, I said, my voice growing colder. I protected myself. Something I should have done years ago. Gavin lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm with a force that sent pain shooting through my shoulder. I'm your son, he growled. How could you do this to me? I yanked free, and from the drawer beside me, pulled out the last truth I had kept locked away. A sealed envelope. You're not, I said. You're not my son. His face froze. What? I raised you, I whispered. I gave you a name, a home, a life, but I didn't give birth to you. Your biological mother was the woman who destroyed my marriage. I took you in because I thought you were innocent. I gave everything to you, and you repaid me with betrayal. He crumpled to the floor, muttering, No, no, like it was a prayer that could rewind time. Delilah stood stone still, her breath ragged, her mascara smearing as tears fell, not from guilt, but fear. I looked at them both, at what I had once called family, and felt nothing, not even satisfaction, just the hollow echo of years lost. Get out, I said, and whatever's left of your life, you built it without me. Behind the door, the silence of the house returned at last, and for the first time in decades, it felt like peace. They didn't leave right away. They pounded on the door, screamed, pleaded, demanded. Gavin shouted my name with a rage that made the walls shake, while Delilah hurled every cruel insult she could muster. You'll regret this, Helen, she shrieked, her voice cracking. You're nothing without us. Her words echoed off the brick like a curse trying to crawl its way into my skin. I stood on the other side of the door, my back pressed to the wood, my hands trembling at my sides. Even now, after all the lies, all the betrayal, after they had tried to murder me, some buried part of me still wanted to believe there was something in them worth saving. But when I looked down at the envelope of final documents clutched in my hand, the credit debt, the false pregnancy, the forged signatures, any last ember of hope finally turned to ash. It was quiet that evening. Too quiet. I sat alone in my kitchen, listening to the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling, as if the structure itself was trying to breathe again after years of holding its breath. But peace didn't come, only numbness, a chilling silence that mirrored the hollow inside my chest. I had won, if that's what this could be called. I had my home, my name, my survival. But I had lost something else along the way. Not just Gavin, not just the illusion of motherhood. I had lost the story I told myself for decades, that love, if pure and selfless, could save someone from themselves. That lie had been peeled away like flesh, leaving nothing but raw understanding behind. The next morning, the doorbell rang again, but softer this time. When I opened it, I found them collapsed on the front steps like stray animals, their faces pale, their clothes disheveled, their bodies slumped over one another. "Gavin," I whispered, my voice caught between panic and disbelief. He stirred slightly, mumbling something incoherent. Delilah moaned beside him, clutching her stomach. For one frozen moment, I thought it was another trick, another act. But when I saw the sweat on their foreheads, the pallor of their skin, I knew this wasn't performance. It was collapse. The kind that comes from prolonged abuse of the body and mind, a crumbling under the weight of guilt, rage, and too much sodium-laced indulgence. I didn't hesitate. I called 911. The emergency operator kept asking if they were breathing, if their pulses were strong. I knelt beside them, checking their vitals with hands that barely remembered how to be gentle. They were alive, but just barely. I watched the paramedics lift them into the ambulance with mechanical precision, watched the gurneys disappear into flashing red and white. I didn't follow. I just stood there, barefoot in the doorway, feeling like a ghost watching the living. Hours later, a nurse called from the hospital. "They're stable," she said, "but weak. The doctors don't know if they'll ever fully recover." I thanked her and hung up without asking for a room number. That night, I stood at the foot of my bed, staring at the place where Benny used to sleep. I lowered myself onto the mattress and curled around his faded blanket like it was the only piece of warmth I had left in the world. I don't know how long I stayed that way, but at some point, the phone rang again. I answered out of reflex. "Mom!" Gavin's voice was fragile, barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry." It came out cracked, exhausted, real. For a second, my throat clenched. I turned toward the window, watching the wind move through the trees outside. "You should be," I said softly, and hung up before the silence could drag me back into the pit I had just clawed out of. The days that followed blurred together. I cooked simple meals in silence. I walked the halls like a stranger in her own home. Every sound, every memory, every echo of Gavin's childhood haunted me. I had given my entire life to someone who only knew how to take. And now that the storm had passed, all that was left was the wreckage of my own identity. I was free, yes, but also unmoored. And for the first time, I understood that freedom, when earned through heartbreak, doesn't feel like victory. It feels like grief in slow motion. It's strange how silence sounds after war. Not the comfortable kind that fills a quiet house in the early morning, but the kind that settles after something has shattered beyond repair. In the weeks that followed Gavin and Delilah's collapse, I moved like a woman underwater, slow, heavy, half-existent. The nurses told me their bodies had finally succumbed to the accumulation of indulgence, stress, and psychological deterioration. "They may never return to full strength," one doctor said gently, as if that revelation should bring me some comfort. But it didn't. Nothing did. I sat outside their hospital room once, just once, and listened through the door as Gavin whispered in a voice so small it barely registered as his own. She was the only person who ever stayed. I pressed my back against the wall, eyes closed, grief rising like bile. It wasn't an apology. It was a funeral song for what never truly existed. They had devoured everything I gave them, my time, my body, my sanity. They had turned motherhood into a long, slow kind of extinction, and now, with their absence echoing through the halls, I wasn't even sure who I was without them, without the fight. I still woke in a panic sometimes, heart pounding, convinced I heard footsteps outside my room. Gavin coming for more, Delilah calling me like a servant. Some nights, I jolted awake thinking Benny was whimpering at the door. But there was nothing. Just air. Just ghosts. I kept his blanket folded in a box beneath my bed. I couldn't bring myself to wash it. His scent was the last thing that made this house feel like it had a soul. I tried to reclaim the space. I painted the walls, moved the furniture, tore down every photo Gavin had hung of himself with Delilah, like they were some fairy tale couple. I found myself standing in the kitchen more often, not to cook for someone else, but just to feel the floor beneath my feet and remind myself that I was still here, that this body, this mind, had endured. I planted herbs in the backyard, lavender, mint, rosemary, plants that didn't ask for much and gave something back. I watched them sprout, watched the green fight its way through the soil, and some mornings I knelt in the dirt, unsure whether I was praying or just trying not to fall apart. And then Walter called. He had reached out once before, a few days after his discharge. "You never told me your name," he said softly, "but I haven't stopped thinking about you." I didn't respond. Not at first. What could I say? That I had saved his life while contemplating the moral weight of nearly taking two others? That my hands, which steadied him on the forest floor, had also offered sedatives laced in food? Still, his voice lingered. He wasn't persistent, just present. A few weeks later, a package arrived. No note, just a manila envelope of internal company documents, all stamped confidential. I didn't have to open them to know what they were. I recognized Gavin's name scratched out, redacted, erased. Erased like he had tried to erase me. The final blow had come, not from my hands, but from a stranger I had saved. I brewed a cup of coffee, sat quietly by the window, and cried without sound. The next day, I called Walter. "I'm ready," I told him, "to come outside." We met for tea, nothing dramatic. Just two people with too much history and no more time for pretense. He never pried, never asked for the parts of my story that hurt to say aloud. He simply held space for me. Sometimes we cooked together. Sometimes we just walked. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't promise to love me. He just stayed. And slowly, I began to return to myself. Not the mother, not the caregiver, not the woman being devoured, but the woman who had survived. One evening, as we sat on my porch, watching the sun melt into the horizon, Walter reached over and gently took my hand. "Do you think you'll ever love again?" he asked. I looked at him, at the quiet kindness in his eyes, and answered truthfully, "Maybe I already am." And for the first time in years, I let that truth settle and didn't feel afraid. This story offers a haunting, yet profound reminder that love, even when given unconditionally, does not guarantee it will be returned with the same devotion. For many older adults, especially those who have sacrificed endlessly for family, it may feel unbearable to confront the truth that some relationships are built not on gratitude, but on entitlement. The lesson here is not about becoming bitter or distrustful, but about learning to protect one's own worth, even from those we love most. It teaches that self-respect must never be sacrificed in the name of parenthood, and that silence in the face of emotional manipulation only deepens the wound. As we grow older, we must give ourselves permission to set boundaries, reclaim our identities, and acknowledge the difference between love and exploitation. The heartbreak of betrayal is real, but so is the power of healing, of starting over, not for others, but for oneself. In the end, dignity is not something we beg for from those who misuse us. It's something we take back when we finally remember our own value. For those in their later years, this story is a quiet call to rise, not in rage, but in quiet, deliberate liberation.